Well, hey folks, it's your old pal, King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. Gnomes is what I decided to go with today. We're going to have our little discussion on how to DM NPC and background character gnomes, so you can help establish some sort of sense of normality for your player characters, and also maybe pick up some stuff I like to do just to make things a little different from how they're presented in the main 5th edition rulebooks. Gnomes are kind of a unique case. Simultaneously, I can't stand them, but I also am very fond of them. Uh, I find them better than halflings, possibly just because there's actually more stuff about gnomes in mythology and fairy tales, and halflings are kind of like a watered down composite of a lot of generic little people, fairy folk kind of legends out of England that Tolkien originally put together. And then there's, all the stupid, crap from the past of, like D&D wasn't allowed to call them hobbits because the Tolkien family was going to sue them or something along those lines. That's not the kind of stuff I, really dig too much into. I don't really care about the behind-the-scenes drama of a lot of these things, but you can't help but hear stories, but whether or not any of that's accurate. But anyway, the version of events that I heard was that, they wanted to call them hobbits, but the Tolkiens were like, no, you can't call them hobbits. That's a copyright. It's unique. Our dad created that. So they went with halfling instead, which is also in the Tolkien books, but whatever. Gnomes have a lot more personality, and that's kind of both their blessing and their curse. A lot of the people who play gnomes, I'm more likely to be okay with someone playing a gnome than playing a halfling, but also at the same time, part of me cringes because, certain kinds of people are attracted to playing these kinds of things. I like using them in kind of a subversive fashion. Nothing is more interesting than when you can successfully get a group of players to, buy into there's kind of silly, annoying gnome villain they're having to deal with, and then they finally actually witness that gnome villain doing something exceedingly heinous and evil, and it's just kind of an interesting juxtaposition of, this small, seemingly easy villain to have to overcome that's just kind of silly, like a recurring gag almost in your game, is suddenly actually like, holy shit, this is like Jeffrey Dahmer level stuff going on here or something. That's the kind of ways I like to use gnomes. In my own homebrew settings, I tend to portray gnomes as being kind of atheistic as a way of distinguishing them from a lot of the other races of the setting. And that, one of the things I liked from 4th edition that they, kind of leaned into is the idea that, the gnomes had been enslaved once upon a time by the Fomori in the Underdark. And so I kind of, using that as like a backstory for gnomes, I kind of like imply there's this thing where, yeah, the gnomes used to be like, held in bondage, in the deep Underdark of the world. And it was their own gnome god, Garl Glittergold, who helped them escape. But in the process of allowing his people to escape the Underdark and reach the surface world, Garl Glittergold had sacrificed himself and is gone. And so since the essential gnome god is dead, they just kind of like don't care so much. So generally, even though it's not entirely forbidden, you're not going to see gnome clerics or gnome druids. Not even much in the way of gnome warlocks. They will still lean heavily into other kinds of magic practicing classes. You're probably not going to see a gnome paladin unless you're leaning more into like the modern, that is based on just having taken an oath and less about any sort of like, crusader pledging your sword to the church kind of stuff, as paladins were kind of a bit more portrayed as in older versions of the game. And I find that just like it's a simple little quirk that gives them a little touch of flavor. It's something that keeps them separated from the dwarves. I feel like there should be like more debate as to whether or not gnomes should be classified as fae. Are they cousins of dwarves, or are they just a fey reflection of dwarves? Because I guess maybe that also leads into, are dwarves actually a fey race, or are they more related to humans and giants? I tend to, you know, in my own settings, kind of fork out the two family trees of the humanoid appearing races in that kind of way, where, you know, the Fey races trace themselves back to like magical origins, and they've split and sundered and bicker. You can play all that kind of, if you want to bring in Seelie and unseelie court kind of stuff into that, you know. But I totally, you know, make a point of including orcs and goblins, and have in the past also framed dwarves as a Fey race, and gnomes. But if you're keeping the dwarves on the other tree, which starts as giants, and as giants devolve, you get smaller and smaller beings like ogres and eventually humans and all that. Dwarves could be a part of that too. In which case, gnomes are kind of just more of the Fey reflection of the dwarf, as opposed to being a slightly smaller version of the dwarf, which I feel like if you frame it that way, it makes them more distinct, because the way they're currently written in the book, they're just tinier, sillier dwarves. But functionally, in terms of like their society, and the way they look and all that other kind of stuff, I don't know, I don't feel like there's enough to radically make them distinguishable from the dwarves otherwise. So I kind of feel like it is good to kind of maybe separate them a little bit in their lineage. You know, but that you know, does cause you to have to then make some counter adjustments as to like what exactly is their native language. Also, because of my thing of having that, you know, the gnomes have fled the Underdark, you know, they're relatively, you know, like, how would you say, like, they're like a radical libertarian kind of people. They don't really want to like be living in the larger cities with the larger races like the hobbits will, and but their isolation is more genuinely like, just leave us alone in our little quiet community as far away from everyone else as possible. They don't have like the long-term political agendas and machinations that elves have. Elves might be like kind of off in their own little beautiful cities, distant from the more cluttered and multiracial human civilizations, but they're not ignoring the world around them. They just, you know, all their plans and plots are on very long looping timelines, because they live, you know, for so damn long compared to humans. So and in contrast, yeah, the gnomes just want to be left alone, you know, so you might have like little forest communities that are, you know, relatively hidden and well defended, and they don't really advertise that much. Same thing with rock gnomes living in mountains and hills. The exception to all that is the deep gnomes. Since you know, my setting, I tend to, you know, I don't like the Underdark, so I keep the Underdark there as a presence in history, but I don't really have it be like a big open adventure avenue, because I don't know, it's just never been my thing, caving. But you know, I still want to include the deep gnomes somehow in the setting, so those will be the gnomes that do live in cities and basically kind of like doing like a night shift kind of lifestyle, where, you know, they'll be security and various kinds of work. All the stuff they do is at night, and, you know, like they might have like a semi-underground neighborhood for themselves, kind of adjacent to like sewer level, even though they're not like, these aren't sewer gnomes, like that's goblin kind of shit. And so yeah, I guess those are just the kind of the basic things I like to do with gnomes. As I say, like I prefer them over halflings. If you're to like make a more finely tuned D&D setting that you know, tries to chop down a lot of some of the excess player races and just tries to keep it down to a core 4 or 5, I'd much rather have gnomes in place of halflings, personally, for whatever reason. And, you know, yeah, like, you know, the player characters are the ones that like have, for whatever personal reason or actual mission they've been sent on, you know, they are the ones that are out there abroad in the world, and they're not like scared and xenophobic. They've been through shit in the past, and they want their communities to not, you know, be, you know, calling a lot of attention to themselves, because they don't want to, you know, become snacks / labor force for another race of giants, kind of a thing. And yeah, just you know, keep an eye on your players if they want to play gnomes. They can, like, I don't know, it's hard to describe, because like I say, like, I'm both more accepting of a player who wants to play a gnome than a halfling, but I also, you're gonna be a silly, whimsical fucking weirdo, aren't you, kind of a thing. But, you know, hey, such is life. Be sure to leave comments below about your thoughts on gnomes and all things gnome related. If how you feel about my thing about should gnomes actually be considered a fey species that's separate from dwarves, or should dwarves be considered a fey race that's separate from the humans and giants? And you know, hit buttons. There's all sorts of buttons on YouTube you can be hitting. Hell, go ahead and hit dislike. It's not like I'm gonna see it. And as always, remember to stay waspinated.